Greek Orthodox Telecommunications presents Holy Image, Holy Space, Icons and Frescoes from Greece, Part 2, A Theology in Colors. Last week we began our tour of Holy Image, Holy Space, Icons and Frescoes from Greece under the inspired guidance of Dr. Gary Vikan, the Assistant Director for Curatorial Affairs at the Walters Art Gallery in Baltimore, Maryland. This week we are completing our visit to this ambitious exhibit which began its 2-year tour of America at the Walters. Holy Image, Holy Space documents the role of Byzantine icons in the development of Western panel painting, and specifically in the formation of such famous masters as El Greco, by evoking the artistic, historical, social, and religious context from which the icon emerged. Icon painting has changed little in the past 12 centuries. After the archetypes for the images of Jesus, Mary, and the saints were established, alterations were deemed inessential. Why change the image if the biblical figures did not change? Thus, copying the archetypes was seen as a way of serving and emulating the figure represented in the icon.
I think when people walk through an exhibition like this and they've never seen Byzantine iconic art, something strikes them, and that is that from the 11th century to the 16th to the 17th century, you're seeing the same themes. St. Nicholas appears again and again and again. And he has to be recognizable. If he's not recognizable, it will not be an icon. Now, the idea is that if St. Nicholas appears to be St. Nicholas over hundreds and hundreds of years, where is creativity? Where is art? Isn't it just copying again and again and again? Isn't it boring? Well, it's not boring at all. You only need to look carefully and you'll find that St. Nicholas is not the same from century to century, and that some icons are profoundly creative and profoundly exciting as works of art. And how do you explain this? What well do they go to draw out this great spiritualism and great aesthetic sensitivity? Well, my guess is that this is the way it is because the Greeks remain Hellenes. They remain very close to their classical Greek roots. And they love to give expression to spiritual values in ways that are visually very, very appealing. Now, it doesn't mean that the icon is, in a functional religious way, any better, because an icon, once it's recognizable, will function as an icon. But over and beyond that, they add a dimension of beauty to it that makes it a wonderful work of art at the same time.
During the 6th and 7th centuries, there was a growing belief that holy objects, relics, and holy places could channel and deliver miracles. Their substance was believed to be sacred. These relic icons included the achieropiite, not made by human hands, and the pilgrim evlogie, or blessings. The achieropiite were the first icons, the most famous being the Mandylion of Edessa, a cloth used by Christ on which his face was miraculously imprinted, and a portrait of the Virgin Mary, painted by the Apostle Luke. The pilgrim evlogie were portions of earth, wax, or oil, which had been sanctified by contact with a holy person or relic, and then mechanically impressed with a stamp that carried an appropriate image of the source of the sanctification.
It's often said that an icon is a door to heaven or a window to heaven, and this is comprehensible, I think, when one realizes that the incarnation demands, really theologically, that Christ became human. He had both a divine and a human nature, and an icon can capture that human nature. No claim is ever made that the icon actually captures the divinity of Christ, but his human side. And somehow if you have that, it's a channel or window through which you can reach the divine. And that all makes good sense. What is often not appreciated is that the window goes both ways. And by that I mean that an icon is a door or window whereby the divine can exercise its power on earth. And to be very specific, in the history of Byzantine Christianity and in icon history specifically, one finds that icons are doing miracles very often. And so you find that someone who believes profoundly in an icon will use it as a vehicle for communication through veneration to the deity, and the deity will respond by performing or exercising a miracle through the panel painting itself. And so it's a two-way street.
Saint Athanasius the Great wrote that God became man so that man could become God. The whole purpose of our life is to lead us from birth through baptism and ultimately through death and then resurrection. And during the course of our life, the Church offers us assistance through the sacraments, through the religious services, but also one tremendous form of spiritual assistance that a person receives is through iconography. Icons have been known in the history of our Church to do miraculous kinds of things, and I don't think people need to marvel about that, because an icon really is an extension of heaven. An icon is a way in which we, as humans who walk upon this earth, can reach out and touch the divine. So if an icon is a portable icon and moves itself about from place to place, as we have known has happened, if an icon is to bleed, if an icon is to weep, if an icon is to be a source of miraculous power, I find that a true strengthening of my faith. I find that as a special message from God that He is working through the holy images which we have made from our own hands. He is working through those images to touch the hearts and the souls of our people. The long history of these miraculous icons and their ability to heal also tells us that God is using these as a healing tool. I find that people should look at those miracles which happen with icons as a strengthening of the faith and an enlightenment of the soul.
The rapid spread of icons throughout the Byzantine Empire faced bitter opposition, and in 726 AD, iconoclasm erupted. Attacks were made against the representations of Christ as a man, for it was believed that icons encouraged idolatry and cheapened the intellectual understanding of Christ, who was more than mere man. The iconoclasts thought that icons of Christ were unable to convey the full Christian message of the nature of the Trinity, and they saw the true image of Christ as the Eucharist. Those who supported icons believed that the image of a holy person partook of the divine nature of the personage and was therefore not merely an object. Because Christ became man and is worshipped, the manifestation of Him does homage to His image.
Iconoclasm is a puzzle in and of itself, and at first it appeared to me, or it seemed to me, and I think to many others, that there was always this nagging feeling in Byzantium that icons were wrong, that somehow this was a recollection of a pagan past and it just shouldn't exist. And after all, there is the commandment of Moses that thou shalt make no graven image. And I think much of the literature on iconoclasm is directed toward explaining why it was that people did revolt against images and eventually why the cult of icons won out. But I think as one begins to understand what icons really are all about, one realizes that iconoclasm was foredoomed to fail, because essential to orthodoxy is the conviction that Christ was both man and God, and that the incarnation brought divinity into corporeal form. And if that's true, then the icon has to exist, because to deny the icon the possibility of showing the face of Christ would be to deny that He actually was a man upon the earth, and that He did walk on earth, and He did behave like a man, and eventually died as a man on the cross. So in the end, one realizes that orthodoxy without the icon is impossible. And it's not as if theologians are trying to apologize for an inclination that the Greeks have to venerate images. Images have to be there. They're implicit in the incarnation itself.
The Orthodox Church, in my opinion, went through this controversy that we call the iconoclastic because it needed to come to a true definition of the role of icons in the Church. There were those who wanted icons, there were those who didn't. There were those, of course, who abused icons. I feel, though, that controversy is necessary often to evolve oneself into the reality of truth. So the iconoclastic controversy really wrenched the Church apart. but in doing so also gave the theologians an opportunity to really reflect upon the role of the icon in the church. It gave people who loved icons an opportunity to reflect upon the true value of them, and they fought in order to persevere and to reinstate icons in the churches. The truth of orthodoxy always conquers whatever controversy comes. And I think that the true sense of orthodoxy in the case of what icons are and what they mean to us eventually was to overcome the controversy which preceded the final solution. And once the final solution came, then people wanted to find a way not only to reinstate the icons, but then develop the whole scheme of orthodox understanding of the position of icons in the church, of the theological role that they were to play in the church, of the tremendous teaching influence they were to have in the life of the church. And because of all that preceded it, we saw a true kind of definition that came prescribing where and how and what iconography was meant to be.
The veneration of religious images was already too deeply ingrained in the Byzantine spirit to be banished forever, and in the year 843 AD, icons re-emerged, once and for all triumphant. From that year forward, orthodoxy could not be orthodoxy without the holy image. An elaborate scheme of mural decoration, mosaics, and frescoes began to develop with the end of iconoclasm. Many have called the icon a theology in colors.
The notion that Byzantine art is theology in colors seems strange to people at first, but the more you think about it, the more sense it makes, because there's such a close match between the way art will manifest itself in the painted panel, in the icon, and the belief that lies behind it. And it's almost true as well to say that an icon is writing in gold, because it's such a close match between the Gospels and the way Gospels express themselves in the painted panel. And I guess I've often thought, and I think I'm saying it more now to people I'm taking through this exhibition, that if the art didn't exist, it would have to be invented to match the belief, and if the belief didn't exist, it would have to be invented to match the art. What a wonderful blend that is.
After the fall of Constantinople to the Turks in 1453, the production of holy images gradually moved north to Russia and the Slavic lands, and west, primarily to the island of Crete in Greece. Even though the manufacture of icons became, in a sense, industrialized, creativity was not compromised. This is evident in an anonymous panel of the 7 Sleepers of Ephesus from Crete, circa 1500 AD.
Here are 7 young men who have just fallen asleep, and the artist obviously loves to be creative. On the first level, he's creative in the way that these fellows sleep, because one of them is scratching his neck, and one of them has his hand over his mouth. One of them has put his nose down into his cape. Another one's head is sort of crooked backwards as if he's snoring. You can almost hear them snoring. And then at the upper left of the panel is this funny little basket, clearly a kind of knapsack that they took with them on their hike. And right along the top of this basket are 5 little olives, black olives. You can imagine that they haven't had a chance to eat their lunch yet. So you see these things, and you see a man who obviously loves to paint. He just likes to have fun, because the story doesn't demand this level of creativity. And we don't know who he was. He probably did these every 12 or 14 days he did another one. But even under those circumstances of anonymity and a kind of business-like production, he could be extremely creative.
Icon painters remained anonymous until the early 13th century. One of Byzantium's first icon painters known by name was Angelos Akotandos. Angelos moved to Crete from Constantinople shortly before the fall of the Byzantine Empire. There he established the roots of a splendid tradition of post-Byzantine icon painting, the Cretan school, which was to flourish uninterrupted almost down to modern times. The Virgin Cardiotissa, signed by the hand of Angelos, is an unusual late Byzantine portrait of the Virgin and Child. For the first time, their relationship is very intimate and emotional. Their cheeks are touching, The baby is grasping his mother's huge head and shoulders and is pressing his own head sharply backward to get as close to her as possible. The gesture is so spontaneous that somehow his left sandal has fallen off his foot.
As we become increasingly aware of Byzantine icons and their sophistication in the 11th and 12th century, it has become increasingly clear that the great painters of the early Italian Renaissance, and by that I mean Cimabue and Duccio, the great painters of northern Italy around 1300, could not have existed as artistic personalities without the Byzantine icon. And in this exhibition, we have a wonderful panel of the Archangel Gabriel that has a gentle quality to the oval face, a kind of almond eyes, that when you see that for the first time, you think, this is Italian. It looks very Italian somehow, because you think of Duccio. And people are very surprised when they're told that this panel painting, and we don't know who painted it, but it was probably done on Cyprus, was painted more than 100 years before Duccio was born. Now that's a raw piece of information that it takes a little while for most people to digest. What this means is that not only does Duccio do something that the Byzantines had done earlier, but that the Byzantines were the source for Duccio. And the mechanism whereby the force of the icon was brought to bear on the West were the Crusades. Because now for the first time, vast numbers of Byzantine icons were being seen by Catholic Latin painters and patrons. And they're seeing paintings that are big and powerful. And this is something totally different from anything they had encountered before, and they're going back and they're trying to imitate them. And it took them a while, I'd say maybe 3 or 4 generations, before they could really capture some of that spirit. And this is the basis of the Italian Renaissance, because from Duccio and Cimabue eventually blossomed Raphael and Michelangelo. And you know, it's funny that people look toward for the roots of the Renaissance around 1300 in northern Italy with Duccio. In fact, they're seeing the base of the tree, and the roots go much, much deeper. And they're all Byzantine, Greek, and Orthodox.
Domenicos Theotokopoulos, the renowned El Greco, was born a Christian Orthodox Greek on the island of Crete in 1541. By his mid-20s, El Greco had become a successful icon painter, leaving for Venice in 1567 at the age of 26.
He was at the top of the trade of icon painting. And thanks to an icon from the Benaki Museum in Athens, which is in our exhibition, we see him painting in that way. Because it's a portrait of St. Luke painting the first portrait of the Virgin and Child. And on the easel is a wonderful Cretan icon, a really very conservative Byzantine icon of the Virgin and Child. So you see that this was how he could paint and how he was painting when he was still on the island of Crete. And yet at the same time, you begin to sense in the figure of St. Luke in that icon, the dynamism, the kind of visual aggressiveness, both in pose and the use of light and the use of shading, that will come to characterize his later work. And he starts to look already more like Titian and Tintoretto than like a Greek icon painter. Now, leave that all aside and then go to the very end of his career. He died in Spain in 1614. And toward the end of his life, he painted quite a number of canvases of apostles and quite a number of portraits of Christ. And some of these portraits are remarkably Byzantine, remarkably icon-like in the way that the figure is organized and the way that the background is shut out so that you really, as a viewer, have to confront that figure directly. You can't escape from it. And even those portraits that are typically Catholic, like our wonderful St. Francis here at the Walters, wherein the figure is not looking at the viewer as an icon would. Nevertheless, it has a level of spirituality to it that seems to transcend what's going on in his own generation in Western Europe. And one begins to understand how all this can happen when you look back through his history and you go back to Crete in the 1560s when he really had achieved that sense of spiritual intensity, and it never left him. It's there all the time. The feeling of icon never really left El Greco.
Over the doors of this cathedral, there is inscribed something which I find very appropriate. And that says that the doorway to heaven is really the entrance to the church. When we enter the church, we are really entering heaven. We are to be removed from the cares of the world. We are to come into a womb-like, secure, comfortable setting that permits us to really savor spirituality. And we as Orthodox Christians know that one of the true ways we savor our Orthodox faith is through the magnificent artwork that we call iconography. In this cathedral, we have now begun to place iconography which we feel is truly fitting to the Orthodox Church. We have selected a man now who is doing major work within the cathedral, an iconographer named George Papastamatiu, whom I consider to be a man who captures truly through his iconographic presentations the kind of spiritual quality that we need.
George Papastamatiu is a third-generation iconographer from Samos, Greece. After learning the basics of icon painting, particularly the Renaissance style, from his family, George studied with the renowned Fotis Kondoglou, from whom he learned the Byzantine style of icon painting.
Ο Άγιος Δημήτριος, αυτός είναι ένα κράμα τεχνοτροπιών μεταξύ μακεδονικής και κρητικής σχολής.
Saint Demetrius is a combination of the techniques of the Macedonian and Cretan schools. It is intended to be an iconostasis icon, and its size is analogous to that of the other 8 or 9 icons that will compose the iconostasis of Saint Demetrius in Saginaw, Michigan. The icon is painted on canvas that has been prepared with titanium and gesso and is going to be painted with acrylics. After the sketching on the canvas, we fill in the basic colors so that we can evaluate what the final look may be.
Προκειμένου να έχουμε την γενική εικόνα του σχεδίου.
Then, following the Byzantine technique, we highlight in the appropriate places to provide dimensionality to the form. We can characterize Byzantine art as being purely geometric.
Μπορούμε να χαρακτηρίσουμε τη βυζαντινή τέχνη από την κοσμική της πλευρά σαν καθαρά γεωμετρική τέχνη. Από εκεί και πέρα ο καλλιτέχνης μπορεί να χρησιμοποιήσει.
Beyond that, the artist can use 20 to 25% of his own talent and personality in order to combine the Byzantine tradition and the style or spirit that he feels represents him best.
Που εκείνος νομίζει ότι τον αντιπροσωπεύει περισσότερο κτλ. Μετά από την προεργασία του ξύλου και εφόσον προηγηθεί το σχέδιο, η σοβαρότερη εργασία είναι η επιχρήσωση του φόντου.
After priming the wood and sketching an outline, the most important task is the pressing of the gold leaf on the background. It must be covered by pure gold leaf because on one hand it adds to the aesthetic value of the icon, but most importantly, the gold represents the brilliance of the kingdom of heaven. In the old times, the iconographer faced serious problems in the gold leaf process. They had to produce their own gold leaf, whereas today science and technology have given us the luxury of having the gold on paper, which is pressed onto the specially treated wood.
Καλύψει προηγουμένως με το ανάλογο φάρμακο, το οποίο λέμε μιξιόν, όταν ολοκληρωθεί η επιχρήσωση του τμήματος που έχουμε προεργαστεί, επακολουθεί στήλβωσης του χρυσού.
When the process is completed, it is buffed and made shiny, then varnished in order to be protected.
Το γυάλισμα και το στήλβωμα το οποίο κάνουμε, το βερνικώνουμε για να το προστατεύσουμε. Το χρυσό μένει αναλύωτο.
Gold remains unaltered forever. Its substance doesn't change, and after many centuries, it becomes sweeter and yellower.
Γίνεται λίγο γλυκύτερο και παίρνει μια κιτρινάδα.
Creating a union between Byzantine art and the architecture, color and light that exists in our Greek Orthodox churches was the most challenging aspect of George's work within the United States.
Η προσπάθειά μου στον καθεδρικό ήταν να μπορέσω
I focused my efforts here at the cathedral on combining Byzantine art with the existing architectural line in order to create harmony with the pre-existing iconography. The only available spaces for the placement of Byzantine icons that can complement the rest of the architectural structure is the platitera. This is because the church doesn't have a dome, so we gave greater emphasis to the Virgin's particular rendition. By obeying the existing structure, I placed her in the given space within a circle supported by angels, which resulted in having Jesus held by his mother in the center of the circle to represent, in a sense, the Pantocrator, who doesn't exist on the ceiling. We did nothing contradictory to the traditions. We simply adjusted the size, shape, and space to the existing needs.
I think that in today's world, we have begun to understand that we need to go back to true Byzantine art forms. We have, perhaps to some degree, brought other art forms into the church, but now realize that the spiritual image that we call an icon has to have qualities about it which truly transport us from earth to heaven. And I believe in the iconography that we have presented here, we have that kind of methodology. We need to assist the worshiper to enter the kingdom of God.
Holy Image, Holy Space, Icons and Frescoes from Greece continues its tour of the United States in Miami, Florida, at the Center for the Fine Arts, November 1988 through January 1989, the Kimball Art Museum, Fort Worth, Texas, February through April 1989, the M.H. DeYoung Memorial Museum in San Francisco, California, April through July 1989, the Cleveland Museum of Art, Cleveland, Ohio, August through October 1989, and the Detroit Institute of Art, Detroit, Michigan, November 1989 through January 1990. The preceding program was brought to you in part by grants from the Acme, Sponge and Chamois Company, Incorporated, Amec Enterprises, Incorporated, and the Century Broadcasting Corporation. This has been a Greek Orthodox Telecommunications production.